It is not like us to say that someone else is wrong on the internet. Well, anyway, several of you reached out about Alex from EV Buyer's Guide saying that everyone should buy a hybrid. Not a PHEV, not an EV, just a plain old mild hybrid, and asked us whether the maths was right. So I leapt into action with my trusty Sinclair Scientific and fed some stats into my Bambleweenie 57 submeson brain. Gave it a really hot cup of tea and took a look. So let's find out just how improbable the "we should all drive hybrids" answer actually is. Now, Alex is by no means the first to say we should just all drive hybrids. It's been a line that Toyota have been harping on about so long that I think that the Vedalaran race... Is that how you say that for a member of the Veldala species? Were probably swearing at their TVs every time a Toyota advert came on. But Alex has conveniently organised the arguments he's made, so I think maybe the best way to do this is maybe to go through Alex's arguments one at a time. So, over to you, Alex.
The important thing to remember about electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, and plug-in hybrid vehicles is that they all use batteries. And batteries are at the moment a very hot commodity in the world.
Okay, so Alex is absolutely right to be concerned about our ability to meet battery demand right now. We have seen from multiple manufacturers, particularly those who aren't vertically integrated, that they are constrained on battery supply. We've seen manufacturers limit availability of EVs because they simply cannot get the batteries. It's not great, and it's ironic that we've hit a point where people are finally cottoning on to the fact that EVs are better for the planet, your pocketbook, and as your daily driver, and we simply can't get enough of them to market. But as the US Department of Energy points out in Fact of the Week number 1271, I'm not the only one here who likes the DOE's Fact of the Week, am I? Anyone? Anyone? Oh, anyhow, in the US alone, expected capacity that has already been announced and is being built or is planned now is expected to exceed 1,000 gigawatt hours by the end of 2030. That's not enough, I hear you cry. But as EES Europe points out, European capacity is expected to grow by at least tenfold to over 1,500 gigawatt hours of battery production. All of which pales in comparison to China's expected battery capacity growth that's expected to exceed 6,000 gigawatt hours by 2027. So, absolutely, lithium battery manufacturing capacity is an issue right now, and probably for the very short term, but it should ease going forward. And let's point out that many hybrids still use nickel metal hydride batteries, not lithium ion. So this isn't an either or. We can build both. Okay, so the TLDR on that is that it's false. Okay, Alex, what's your next thought?
A lot of folks had sort of guessed that by now batteries would be becoming cheaper and cheaper every year, but in fact, thanks to demand, prices are going back up. Some folks are pinning their hopes on solid-state battery technology, but solid-state batteries aren't going to be any more available than regular lithium-ion batteries. In fact, it's going to be quite some time until even the wildest projections put solid-state batteries ahead of lithium batteries. And remember, solid-state battery technology is still lithium-based.
Yes. Battery costs, and he's bang on. From 2021 to 2022, battery costs have gone up. Depending on where you get your stats from, battery costs have gone up by around 7% overall, and lithium iron phosphate has gone up a staggering 27%. Those stats are from Bloomberg, incidentally, which match those quotes from Alex. And let's be clear, those price increases are pretty rough for manufacturers and have no doubt in part driven the cost increases we've seen from a lot of major manufacturers through the year. Although it should be noted that a pretty common trope among CEOs is that they actually love high inflation because it means they can jack up prices under the guise of, it's just inflation. But just like when folks zoom in on a climate change graph to prove there's no climate change because it snowed last Tuesday, just looking at prices over the last year or two masks something astonishing. Actually, a couple of really astonishing things. One, the energy density, both measured gravimetrically, that's the weight, and volumetrically, that's the volume, of lithium batteries has increased dramatically. In fact, volumetrically, you're looking at packs that are about 8 times as energy dense as a pack produced just over a decade ago. So you're getting more bang for your buck, well, more electrons for your given weight and volume of battery. Hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could just install smaller batteries in cars? I mean...
Kate, stop what you're doing. Everybody knows that we want smaller cars, okay? We've done that before. Also, I'm not driving, but just, no, carry on.
All right. But the other thing is that the cost of lithium batteries has fallen by 97% since they were first commercialized back in 1991. That's frankly staggering. And while we're definitely seeing a bit of an uptick as demand for EVs massively increases, we're also seeing response to this with, for example, increasing manufacturing capacity, increasing recycling, and increasing resource extraction. Another response is fairly obvious. There's a reason there's been a price increase for LFP batteries, and that is increasing demand. That's because while they've bumped up by a greater percentage than the battery average, they're still significantly cheaper overall than NMC chemistry batteries. We're also continuing to see research looking at alternative battery chemistries, including sodium-based batteries and aluminium-air batteries. It's possible some of these different chemistries may alleviate the problems with availability of lithium batteries. Anyhow, so I think we're going to have to rate this one as false as well. Here, Alex, I'm sorry. I mean, very narrowly and specifically it's true, but looking at the bigger picture, it says no. Okay, so neither of these arguments really hold up. I mean, we can build hybrids and to some extent even PHEVs using other chemistries so that we don't hold up the transition to EVs, and the cost increase, while a pain, isn't that big in the grand scheme of things and will probably disappear as more and more battery manufacturing capacity comes on stream. Also, let's be fair, if we stopped subsidising fossil fuels, we could use some of that money to subsidise the cost of the transition. But the tofu of the matter in Alex's argument is that the reduction in CO2 as a whole for society is better if everyone goes hybrid than if only a few of us go electric. And it sort of feels like that's not a wholly unreasonable argument. If you can get everyone in the US into a hybrid, then it might make some kind of sense. And then just as winding up the fuel efficiency and tightening up the emissions requirements have effectively killed European ICE engine development, that same process could eventually work here. But let's look at Alex's numbers, because my gut says they're kind of optimistic. But it's a good idea not to just go with your gut, so let's run the numbers. Now, my first cautionary warning here is that he's running them based on his own commute, 64 miles every day, which is incredibly unusual. The average US total daily commute is 41 miles, according to the National Household Travel Survey. Alex is also assuming an incredibly rare situation for his plug-in hybrid calculations. At least he says he is. We'll come back to that in a moment. He says he's assuming that there is charging both at home and at work. For many people, even just charging at home is a challenge, and unless you work at Transport Evolved, charging at work is a rarity. And this is where things rather rapidly fall apart, because things very quickly don't add up. First up, and just FYI, if you're playing along at home, he says he's using the 16,650 miles that he has on screen, but he's not. He's using 16,640, which is a 64 mile a day commute every day and no other driving. So I don't know about you, but even though I am about as social as a rock, I still manage to rack up more than a few local miles, and I live in a city. I'm given to understand that Alex lives out in the sticks, but apparently he's not going anywhere else. Just work and home 5 days a week. Now, if you run the numbers for the US averages, 41 miles of commute a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year, you get about 10k miles, which suggests that almost a third of an average person's 13,500 miles a year of driving is non-commute. So basically, the first thing we've established is that these figures aren't really very representative, but we'll see how the maths stacks up anyway. Now, Alex says that the Soul gets 31 miles per gallon, which is roughly the EPA combined efficiency, and maybe that's what he actually gets. But the average from Fuelie for a 2021 Soul is 28.7 miles per gallon, which pushes the number of gallons he would use in a year up to 580 gallons. Okay, so let's look at the hybrid. The EPA says the Nero hybrid gets around 49 miles per gallon, which equates to 339 gallons per year. But as we've learned over many years, the actual value that cars get is not the sticker value. And using Fuelie's actual value of 46.3 miles per gallon, and remember, this is from folks who are actually paying attention to their gas usage, so it's probably more efficient drivers in general, we get 360 gallons. Ace! We are saving 220 gallons a year by driving a hybrid, even despite the Nero being slightly larger than the Soul. Okay, so let's look at the PHEV. Now here Alex says he's using 83 gallons in a year. I cannot make that maths work, because he's also saying he's got charging at home and at work, which would mean that best case he would use the new Nero PHEV to drive to work and back entirely in electric mode. Now, obviously that's unlikely to actually work because, weather exists. But even using the old model with its 26-mile range, I still couldn't make the maths work. Incidentally, with that you'd end up using at least 68 gallons of fuel a year. So somewhere between none, 68 and 83. Only you'd probably use more than that because you're unlikely to get the actual rated electric miles every single day. But let's look at some actual usage information, because this matters. Alex is arguing that everyone should drive a hybrid, but he's doing it based on how he drives. And on the straight maths here, then I'd say actually maybe a PHEV would make the most sense, which for many folks who don't have the funds to go full EV yet, it could. For the most people, that could cover the bulk of their driving if they have charging at home. But in reality, the ICCT found that the real-world electric drive usage of plug-in hybrids is about 26 to 56% lower than the EPA sticker range, which would equate in this case to a range of around 20 miles. In that case, of Alex's 16,640 miles, only 10,000-ish could be covered in electric mode at best. Unfortunately, the ICCT also found that fuel consumption was about 42 to 67% higher than the EPA sticker for PHEVs. That means that instead of getting the roughly 109 mpge it's expected to land in testing, you'll probably get much less. Using Spirit Monitor's larger database of PHEV drivers, I got an overall average of 66 miles per gallon, much less than the 109 mpge that is quoted by the EPA. And that means that realistically you can expect that over the 16,640 miles, that PHEV, it's still going to use 252 gallons of fuel, more than triple the amount that Alex states. And that's because the real world is rarely as nice and clean as a lab, and people just don't plug in every day. And sure, that's still a big savings over the plain old gas car. That's 328 fewer gallons of dead dinosaur being burned. But the kicker in this math isn't that first year, or the second year, or even the third year, which is typically the year that an EV running on clean energy makes up the difference between its production and a gas car's production and output. Nor is it even somewhere around year 5 or 6 when, right now, an EV running on the US or European grid mix gets cleaner than a gas car. And remember, that's the grid mix now. Both Europe and the US are adding renewables at a frantic pace and closing unprofitable, dirty, old coal plants. So that time frame for it balancing out gets shorter and shorter. It's the at least 6 years that the car is on the road after that where every single year from burning the gasoline alone, that hybrid will churn out at least 3 metric tons of carbon dioxide from its exhaust pipe. Not counting the carbon dioxide from production, from refining, from storing, from shipping, and from cleaning up the pollution of spills of oil to make that gasoline. That's just from the gasoline one single reasonably efficient hybrid will burn in a year. There are nearly 300 million vehicles on the road in the US. The average age of US vehicles has increased to 12 years, pretty much the same as Europe, and that means these vehicles, these inefficient, dirty Victorian clunkers, will still be churning out toxic fumes that we know very clearly cause climate change and are incredibly damaging to human health. They will still be on the road over a decade from now. They'll still be spewing out those fumes as we desperately scrabble towards net zero, and they'll have released around 12 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere by the time they're scrapped. So should we all buy hybrids now? We know that the batteries don't need to be shared. We know that the costs will go down. We know that the maths doesn't really work, and we know that they'll keep destroying the planet. So no. If you don't have any access to charging at all, then sure, a hybrid is better than buying a less efficient gas car. But whatever Toyota might like to claim while they're mocking EVs, a hybrid is just a gas car. For some folks, a PHEV might make financial and environmental sense if you have charging at home or at work, or even better, if you have it both places and are able to plug in consistently. Especially if your daily commute is possible almost entirely on electrons, then yes. But if you're not able to consistently plug in, probably not. But in reality, at this point, we need people to be getting into EVs, and we need to be expanding public transport and building walkable urban environments. Because if we don't push manufacturers to build battery capacity now and electrify everything, does anyone realistically believe that they will? And on that note, we're done with today's video. If you liked it, you know what to do, and feel free to tip us with a super thanks. The comments are open for your thoughts, as is our Discord chat room, link below. And if you want more, subscribe, hit the bell, and follow the links below to support us with a YouTube membership or a Patreon subscription. You'll also find links to our Ko-fi, Bitcoin, and our swag store. Check us out on Mastodon. We have our very own server. Scrolling by on my right is our amazing list of charged up supporters, and shout outs go to our self-driving tier supporters Mike Weeder, Tony Moss, Linda Irish, Sean Tucker, Paul Nelson, Patrick Boyarski, Chris Maxwell, Brian Newton, Mokel Goad, Bennett Elder, Andrew Martin, Pedro Muro Pinheiro, Brophy Wolf, Chris and Michael Johnson, Tesla in the Gong, Dan Blair, Peter Dillinger, Gordon C, Stephen O'Donoghue, Kyle Hodgson, Anthony Coates, Regine Fellows, Denny Hyde, Chris Ascenter, and Jim Burness. Finally, out of this world, thanks to our Starman supporters, Robert Flannery, CPU Freak 101, Andrew Glenn, Anonymous Freak, JP Fagerback, Joe Bresney, John Lyons, Rory Litwin, Kevin Burrabridge, Dave Kitchen, Aaron Han, Laura Reynolds, Marcel Ward, Matthew Drobnak, Paul Conway, Reggie Watts, Will Graylan, and of course Ian. We'll be back soon with more videos, but until then, keep evolving!